Thank you all for coming. I'd like to welcome you here tonight. I'm Francis Seaman, Chairman of GlobalNet 21, and we're holding this debate today here in Lansdowne, as you can see, which is really fantastic for us. And the reason this came about is that I made contact with Marcus Wary, who's a member of the club and the Lansdowne Debating Society, also runs the Real Debate Club on the Meetup site, and we thought we'd have a joint event because in GlobalNet we often don't have debates, we have meetings. There's a lot of discussion and dialogue. Marcus will introduce the speakers. Thank you, Marcus. And over to you. And you'll tell everyone about the hashtag.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Francis. Thanks for coming. So we've got a Twitter wall here. If you're into tweeting, you can tweet questions and comments to PovertyGN21. They'll come up here, and then I'll try and incorporate some of them into the discussion that will happen after the speakers have done their bit. The format for tonight is that the people proposing the motion will get 8 minutes, and then the seconders will have 4 minutes. Then after questions, they'll have 2 minutes to sum up whilst we take the final vote. We've taken a vote beforehand as well, which I shall reveal shortly. Firstly, to kick it off, before I introduce the speakers, I actually want to show you a very short 2-minute video, which is actually the exchange between Margaret Thatcher and Simon Hughes in the House of Commons towards the end of Thatcher's tenure, where they were talking about this very topic when errors occurred. Margaret.
I give way to the honourable gentleman.
There is no doubt that the Prime Minister has in many ways achieved substantial success for the economy. There is one statistic that I understand is not, however, challengeable, and that is that over her 11 years, the gap between the richest 10% and the poorest 10% in this country has widened substantially.
That's right.
How can she say at the end of her chapter of British politics that she can justify many people in a constituency such as mine being relatively much poorer off, much less well housed, and much less well provided than it was in 1979? Surely she accepts that is not a record that she or any Prime Minister can be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, all levels of income are better off than they were in 1979. But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have. And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That is the Liberal policy. Yes, it came out, he didn't intend it to, but he did. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. The Prime Minister is aware that I detest every single one of her domestic policies and have never hid that.
And I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap were that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, so long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way. To the honourable gentleman.
I'll tell what the initial vote was. If Maggie was alive today, she'd have her work cut out by the looks of it. The poor are getting poorer. For the motion, we have 59%. Against the motion, we have 16%. And we've got 25% abstaining. At the end of the evening, we're not going to allow abstaining. So we'll move towards a kind of a clearer outcome. So you ditherers will have to make up your mind. So yeah, I'll introduce the speakers now and we'll crack on. So We've got, proposing the motion to my left, we have Joanna Mack, who's the Open University lead in the ESRC Poverty and Social Exclusion Unit. And supporting her and seconding the motion is Sean Dolan, who's the campaign manager of Conscience. Opposing the motion, we have Christopher Snowden, who's representing, who's Director of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And supporting him is Jonathan Lee, who's a lawyer and a blogger involved in tech startups and other things like that. So, without further ado, yes, the proposers will speak for 8 minutes, and I'll be clinging glasses and things if you go over the mark, and the seconders will be for 4 minutes, but I'll crack on with Joanna Mack, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm so glad we started Margaret Thatcher, because the work I've done over the last 30 years, first started in 1983, in many ways it actually is measuring the effects that those policies, the subsequent policies, have had on the poor in Britain. And that's what I want to be talking to you about today. It's really looking at whether growth on its own raises the living standards of the poor within the society in which they live. I'm going to look, therefore, at the UK, and I'm going to look at living standards rather than income, because I think that's a better measure of the situation and the lives of the poor. As I say, I've now done 4 major studies on this, starting in 1983, 1990, 1999 and 2012, and they've all used the same approach and the same methods, so it means we can make direct comparisons on the living standards of the poor across that period, and it's the only research that's done that. I'm obviously hoping to convince you that the poor have indeed got poorer. I'm hoping to convince you on that, not just that their relative position in society, important as this is, because it actually determines the extent they can partake in society, not only has their relative position got poorer, but in recent years their absolute position has got poorer. They're absolutely worse off than they were at the turn of the millennium. I'm going to first tell you a little bit about Rennie and her family. Rennie works full-time as a mental health nurse, a really important job. She lives with her children and her mother in a flat in Hackney. The flat has severe damp. The family, particularly the children, are not surprisingly often ill. We know that damp causes a whole range of childhood illnesses. Damp and overcrowding are killing us, Rennie tells me. As we've got older, things have got worse, not better. In our poverty surveys, we ask people about the necessities of life, things which everyone should be able to have, everyone should be able to afford, and which no one should have to go without. Living in a damp-free home, along with being able to heat your home adequately, have been top of the list of the necessities over the last 30 years. 95% of the population think that this is something that everyone should have. In 1983, around 6% of households lived in a damp home. It now stands at 10% of households. So much for a property-owning democracy. It has not benefited those at the bottom. Nearly 1 in 5 children, that's 2.5 million children in this rich country that we live in a damp home. The proportion not being able to heat their home has also, and in this case it's risen sharper, it's almost doubled over the last 30 years. In 1983, 5% of households could not afford to heat their home. This dropped a bit during the 1990s, but by 2012 had jumped to 9%. Let's look at another basic item, food. We all know that this is a real problem for many people because we see the rise of food banks soaring in the last few years. And again in the survey we've looked at what people think should be the necessities of life of food. There are 2 meals a day, fruit and veg every day, and meat and fish or a vegetarian high protein equivalent every other day. And again, those who cannot afford these basic items has risen in recent years. Family after family tells us when we do our qualitative work, I only eat 1 meal a day. That does me because I like to make sure I've got enough for my children. You go for what's cheap, says a disabled couple. That isn't always the healthy option. They know what the healthy option is, they can't afford it. My sons, they have fruit and veg over the weekend and eat it as soon as they get it. I can't go and get any more because I don't have the money. To argue that the poor are not getting poorer, you simply have to dismiss this whole weight of evidence that these surveys have shown and other surveys have shown, and argue instead that the poor today have far more goods and have a far higher standard of living than in the past. In some ways, they do lack certain items like indoor toilets. Possession of some consumer goods, such as a refrigerator, is far more widespread. And this is true, and it's good. But these comparisons fail to understand that people don't live in the past, they live in the present day, and that society has changed, and that new needs have emerged, and these new needs put increasing pressures on people's incomes. Our surveys enable us to track these changes. I'll give you one example, which I think is quite illustrative. In 1983, we didn't ask about computers. Not surprisingly, they were only just becoming consumer goods. In 1990, it was added to the list we tested. Very few people thought it was a necessity. But by 2012, 66% thought that a clear majority thought that children should have a computer to do their homework. A single parent from Belfast explains this. I do see poverty as relative. I mean, I'm in the situation at the moment where the twins, they're both doing their GCSEs. 15 years ago, people would have laughed at you if you said, I think I'm poor because I can't afford laptops for my girls. But nowadays, people agree with her. She does need to have them. And we know that children who do not have these kind of educational kits do not do so well at school. The items we ask about in the survey are drawn from focus group discussions, and new ones are added to the list as to be tested because they're raised important by people. So more questions of finance have got added over the years because they've been raised by our participants. This is not surprising. Arrears on bills are up 15% in 1983 to 21% in 2012. Borrowing's up. But they only become seen as necessities. The majority of people agree with them. In 2012, we tested 46 items in the range across heating, clothing, housing, all sorts of things, and 25 are seen as necessities. We then find out who lacks them because they cannot afford them. Critics of our work tend to pick on one of the items from that list and say, you can't say people are poor because they lack that item. A television is very often the one chosen. Interestingly, because it is actually the one item that divides people's opinion. They divide by economic and social background. Those who live on low incomes, those who are disabled, those who are elderly, think it's a necessity. They can't go out, they don't have the choices. People on higher incomes don't think it's a necessity, so bear that in mind. When we ran this survey in Benin, which we've run it now across the world, Benin is the 21st poorest country out of all the countries in the world. And even they think it's a majority of people think it's a necessity. So just picking on one item and saying poor aren't poor because they don't have it doesn't work. You're in the minority, not the majority. Across all our items, we find that, apart from the television, that those who think it's a necessity are very closely shared by all social groups in society, by women, men, high incomes, low incomes. The TV is the exception. Now I'm going to bring this all together by looking back across the last 30 years. In 1983, 14% of people lacked 3 or more necessities. In 2012, it was 30%. We've taken this level as the cut-off point as we find those who lack that number of necessities form a distinct group who not only miss out on a wide range of aspects of their lives, but they also suffer a wide range of other problems such as poor health, and they're actually also very likely to see themselves as poor. This group, this is important to note, are not spending their money on other things. They are much, much, much less likely to have items that are not seen as necessities than anyone else. They don't have them because they can't afford them. Some critics say that these aren't in poverty. It's semantics. I'm coming to the end of mine.
Okay.
But you want me to come to
No, you've got a minute.
I've got a minute. Okay. But that's just playing with words. They also say we're not comparing like with like, because the people on that 1983 list, other than those items seen as necessities in that period, those in 2012, the necessities seen in 2012 as necessities. Of course that's the case, and of course the items in the list have changed. Society has changed. Adam Smith recognised this when he identified the necessaries of life. It's really time that those who say the poor are better off because they are better off than the poor in the past accept that needs are socially determined, and therefore the poor can possess goods the poor or the past didn't have, indeed weren't even invented, but still fall below the standards of society, and therefore they are poor. Just one final thing if I've got time. Yep. We've also looked at people's lack of necessities in 2012 compared to 1999 using the 99 list of necessities. That is, we've used a fixed measure against a fixed point of time. Far more people lack those items today that were assessed in 1999 and then did in 99. That is, using a fixed measure at a fixed point of time, the numbers of people in poverty lacking those things has risen sharply. That is, absolute poverty has risen during this millennium. Not just more people are getting poor, the poor are getting poorer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.